G'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about tooth height and what role that plays in cutting the timber. So I'll try to explain it as best as I can and hopefully you can understand. So what I've got here, and I've zoomed in at the moment, but when I finish talking about it, we'll zoom back out and I can show you exactly what this setup is. So this setup is that there's a digital caliper sitting up on this vise, and what it does is measure the height differential between here and the back of the witness mark. So if I set it where it is at the moment, it's on 0 on the caliper. If I lift the caliper up and bring it down where the witness mark is, I get a differential of 1.5 millimeters. That's 1.5 mil. So the difference in height between here and here is 1.5 millimeters, which is actually quite a lot. There it is there, 1.5 millimeters. So that's the digital caliper that sits there. And we can measure the height differential. Why is that important? Well, it's a little bit like a circular saw blade. I'll explain it that way first. Here's a circular saw blade. Now, if we come back a bit, you'll be able to see it. Now, the carbide tips that are on the end, if they were shorter, in other words, if one was longer or shorter than the other, they'll cut at different rates. So the shorter the carbide tip, the less material that it would cut. So they're made uniform. Does the same principle apply with a chainsaw chain? If we've got 1.5 millimeters from a brand new chain right at the very point to the end of life is 1.5 mil, and that's roughly on a 10-degree slope. So the tooth slopes back about 10 degrees. That means that if you've got all uneven teeth on your chainsaw, that means that the depth that will cut each tooth will be slightly different. And you might say, oh, what difference is that going to make? Actually, more than what you may think, because I've got a whole bunch of chainsaw chips and I measured them with a vernier, and I measured from 0.1 of a millimeter even up to a millimeter. So when they talk about filing your teeth, if you look at some of the videos from Stihl, from Oregon, from various other companies or chainsaw companies out there that tell you how to maintain your chain, they will tell you to keep them all the same length. There's even some of them that will even tell you to use a digital caliper where possible. Not that I would do that. So when we're doing maintenance on our chainsaw chain, a lot of people are using this type of gauge, this raker gauge tool. And it's a constant gauge. And by that I mean you'll see 0.65. When this is placed on top of, and we'll just sort of get that there, when we place this on top, it will measure the height differential between the top of the tooth. We'll just see if we can get in there. It'll measure between the top of the tooth and the top of the raker. And if it protrudes out of this gap, because it's set at 0.65 of a millimeter, you'll run the file over and you will set the height. That will happen from a brand new chain to the end of life. So you're setting the actual height differential of the tooth. So what that will do is keep that height uniform. But if the teeth are in different lengths, it could cut crooked. A progressive depth gauge will solve that problem irrespective of whether the teeth are different lengths. And it's placed over the top. Like that. And where it protrudes out here, you run the file over. Now, you can have different lengths of the tooth, could be different lengths. And if you're using a progressive depth gauge, it will cut dead straight. It's a good practice to try and keep the left teeth all uniform in length and the right teeth all in uniform in length. So, the thought here is if all the teeth are even in length where practical and possible, using a progressive depth gauge, not a constant depth gauge, that when the chain comes around the bottom, it'll be quite tight, and not every cutter. So when the chain's coming around, we'll just turn it around, it's on the bottom of the bar of the chainsaw, travelling towards you. If the height of those teeth is uniform, it stands to reason that it's going to take the same size chip. If it takes the same size chip, each cutter is doing its fair share of the work. So the new school of thought is, even if you're using a progressive depth gauge, it will compensate for the different lengths. Where possible, try and keep them the same length so each individual tooth does its fair share of cutting, and you'll definitely find out that your chips will be a little bit more uniform in size, the thickness, not the length, the thickness of them. There is a variation of the chips. They can, as I said, they can go from 0.1 to 1 millimetre, so that's a huge variation. And if we said that our tooth before, the measurement on here was 1.5 millimetres between a brand new chain and at the end of the life, you'll find out that there's, if the teeth are short, you'll find out that the variation can have an effect on your cutting performance. So I guess the end conclusion is if everything is equal in length, it will cut the same. And it generally will. So even though I've done many of videos before and said, look, you don't have to worry about the length of the tooth because this will take care of the problem. It'll make sure that you're not cutting crooked. That information is true and correct. But if your teeth are all different sizes, they definitely won't be cutting the timber exactly the same. And for those that don't know, when a tooth comes underneath the bar, comes along, strikes a bit of timber, it pushes down like that, and it's the raker that prevents it from digging in. So it has this little kicking, rocking motion. Now, not all the teeth can bite and dig in the timber simultaneously. They all take their turns. But if they're all the same height, that means that they'll all bite in fairly uniform in size, and the chain will be much more efficient. You might even find out that it reduces vibration as well. If everything is equal and everything is even, it stands to reason that everything will be smoother. Anyway, that's my thought on the subject. Keep your teeth, where practical, where possible, all the same length. Use a progressive depth gauge, one of these. Don't use a constant depth gauge. And you'll find out that your cutting efficiency will definitely improve. Now, if you ask me how much, I haven't done laboratory experiments, but I'm sort of predicting it could be anywhere between 5 and 10%. But hey, 5 and 10% is better than nothing. So that's the latest. Any comments are welcome. Thanks for watching. Bye for now, and please subscribe.